we're going to take another hypothetical journey this morning, and we are going to suppose for a moment that each person here, including me, has had the Lord call them and lay upon their heart to take the good news of Jesus to New Delhi, India. Each person here has been called in their own little world, in their own setting, in their own Sitzimleben, in their situation in life, to go to New Delhi, India to share the good news. And so we all, individually, in our own places, we go to raising our support, because you'll need support to go and do that. And then you go and you apply for your visa, and you get your visa based on the fact that when you get to New Delhi, you have been invited by the local university to come and speak about this Jesus that now has been popularized in a Mel Gibson movie that even embraces the original languages. And so you get your visa based on that, and then you work to get your passport, which is one difficult thing. Believe you me. Right, John? Anytime you work with Washington, D.C., it's difficult. And you get all your ducks in a row. You get all your bills lined out, how your bills are going to be paid. You pack your bags. You take as much American food as possible in the biggest trunk they will allow you to carry. Because you can't drink the water, and you got to be very careful of what you eat. So you put all of that together. You book your airline tickets, and you say your goodbyes, and you board the plane, and you fly 8,000 miles to the destination that God has called you to share Jesus. And when you deplane in New Delhi, you are at once hit squarely in the face with culture shock. And I do mean culture shock. Welcome to the land of 330 million gods. 330 million gods. Welcome to the country that is the birthplace of most of the Eastern religions. Religions that literally dominate the world. Buddhism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Jainism, and a number of other isms that are Eastern in their thinking. Asian, Indo-European, whatever you want to call it. This is the birthplace. So you get in a cab and you ride to the University of New Delhi, and as you're driving, you see Hindu women who are wearing the bindi, or the bindu, or the kumkum red dot in the center of their heads. You see all the women wearing those. You see scores of people. You see many people that are completely malnourished, and yet you look around and there are animals everywhere. People who are bloated from no protein, while cows sit on the ground next to them. There are magnificent architectural works, buildings with incredibly ornate carvings of Hindu gods, as this slide depicts. Now, once you get to the university, you're overwhelmed at the diversity of the people and the cultures there. In New Delhi, it seems that this is the cultural melting pot of India, maybe of the entire East. Tens of thousands of people. There are huge groups all over campus who are following different groups. They are disciples of different teachers. Some following the ways of Hindu, some following the ways of Buddhism, some following the ways of Zoroastrianism, and so on. Little clusters of disciples everywhere, as a sage or sages instruct their people in the teachings of that religion. You walk through these groups of people into the theater on campus where India's intelligentsia have gathered to hear you. There in that place you have professors, you have teachers, you have city and national leaders. You have businessmen and women. You have India's most notable politicians. You even have high-ranking military officers in attendance. You are possibly in the most influential city for Eastern religions in the world. And they are all gathered in this theater in New Delhi, India, to hear you talk about Jesus. Now here's the punchline. What will you say? Where will you start? If you think this is a daunting task, you're exactly right. And now you know, and I know, a little of how Paul felt. Paul wasn't in New Delhi. wasn't in India. But he was, in the setting we're going to discuss this morning, in the most culturally influential city in the world during his life. He was in a center of art, in a center of athletics. There were all kinds of people. This city was the cultural melting pot of the first century. Furthermore, this city was the birthplace of many of the religions that permeated Paul's society. There were groups of people, clusters of disciples that followed different sages, different teachers, different leaders, learning the basics of these different religions. Paul wasn't at a university, but he was at a great learning center where all the intelligentsia had gathered. No, Paul was not in New Delhi. He wasn't even in India. He was in the great city of Athens, Greece. While Paul was waiting for Timothy and Silas in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to the meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean." Parenthetical statement from Luke. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking and listening to the latest ideas. The intelligentsia of Athens had gathered, and Paul is on center stage. Now, back to my question. And I hope you see the parallel. We're in New Delhi, India. Paul is in Athens. What do you say in this setting? How do you start this spiritual discussion about Jesus? Bottom line is, you tell it like it is in a roundabout way. You tell it like it is in a roundabout way. I want you to look at Paul's heart in this passage. He was greatly distressed, the text says. Why was he greatly distressed? Not a hard question, the text. Because the city was full of idols. And listen, he knew, and we know today, that idolatry in any form has been the bane of any society since Adam. It has been the downfall of every society since Adam. Idolatry. And Paul is greatly distressed that this city is particularly full of idols. Now, Paul knows he has the answer to what they're looking for and what's motivating them to serve idols in the first place. He knows that God has created a big void in the soul of man. And so here is a group of people, here's a whole culture of people who are reaching out for a higher power. And Paul knows that. But there are some obstacles. Just like there would be obstacles for us standing on center stage at a university in New Delhi, India. There are obstacles. For instance, we are most likely going to be in a group of people that are more learned than we are. They're more cultured than we are. They're more insightful. They're probably just plain old smarter than we are. Than he was. And certainly, without question, the group in Paul's day and the group in the fictional scenario that I painted this morning would certainly be more skeptical. Don't you think they have heard everything? They have heard it all. The intelligentsia. We've heard of every religion and every great leader and all. We've heard it all. Look at all the religions we have here, they would say, whether in Athens or in India. We've got Greco-Roman. Read your mythology books. When is that? Junior high? High school? When do you study mythology? High school? Read your mythology books. That's Greco-Roman idolatry. And as I've already mentioned, look at the religions that exist from the East today. You've had no time. Now listen, this is key. You've had no time to build relationships with these people. They don't know us. They didn't know Paul from Adam's house cat. No time for relationships, no time to build credibility, no time to rub elbows with outsiders. You're on stage. What will you say? Well, Paul cut right to it in a roundabout way. He stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and he said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Now, what you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you." That is absolutely a brilliant way to approach sharing Jesus in this setting. This approach that Paul embraces is called the indirect method, the indirect approach, and it starts with a hook. Everybody know what a hook is? Lots of fishermen in here. Everybody knows what a hook is, right? What's a hook, Coda?
It's how you catch fish.
How does it catch them? It barbs them and they can't turn loose. Everybody, every speaker needs a hook. Guess what Paul's is? It's a good one. He compliments them. He compliments them. Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. Now this is a fair question. Why would he do that? Isn't that a little bit misleading? No, I don't think it is. I think he spoke the truth. They are very religious. Were they very religious? Yes, they had thousands of inscriptions and altars to these gods. They were very religious. Why then doesn't he approach it the way that I used to, the way that I was taught? Smack them in their face with their wrongdoing. Smack them in the head with their sin, with how they're misguided. Nail them with their false doctrine. He could have stood up and he could have said this: "You guys are nothing but a group of polytheistic, arrogant, pseudo-intelligent losers who are going to burn in hell." Now, only God can judge a man's soul, but with everything else, Paul was probably right on. It would have been the truth. Instead, he says, "Men of Athens, I can see in every way you're very religious." He pats them on the back. Why? Because honey draws more flies than manure. That's why. He hooks them and drags them in. You see, the indirect method will typically start by identifying something positive in the other person. Were these men religious? Yes. Were they correct? No. But by identifying something positive that they were doing in their faith, Paul has hooked them, and now they're listening. If he had started accusatorily, pointing out their misguided practices, they would have turned him out. They would have turned a deaf ear to him, because they've heard it all before anyway. If you don't think this is true, then I want you to think back on a time when you did the same thing. Think back on a time where the first thing you said to somebody was pointing out something they were doing wrong, even if it was true. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't like that done to you. For somebody to come up and just tell you, you really stink at this, or you really ought to change this. This is really offensive, or this is really bad, or wear deodorant, or get some soap or scope or something. That'll make you feel good. Might be true, doesn't make you feel good. And what do? What happens to that person's credibility? It tanks in your mind. And so, Paul comes at it from a different vantage point. The moment, if he would have pointed an accusing finger at their practices, his condescending and judgmental attitude would have immediately turned them off. He could have written them off. Now, this is a disclaimer. I'm not saying that you avoid the truth. You never avoid the truth. You simply bring it in through a different door. You never avoid the truth. You simply bring it in through a different door. Paul was great at this. Jesus was the master of this. You read his stories in dealing with outsiders and rubbing elbows with the irreligious. You read his encounters with those folks and see how he brought truth in from a different door, rather than just smacking them in the face and making them feel bad. If you would have asked me, young lady, I would have given you living water. Living water? That sounds good. You mean I don't ever have to get thirsty again and I don't have to come back here? This is great. Go and call your husband. I don't have a husband. That's right. You've had a string of bad marriages. What you've said is true. See, he didn't start there. He got her there. Because he brought it through a different door. Men of Athens, you've got lots of gods. And I can see that in every way you're very religious. In fact, there's one over here that you've written in the scripture. This is the one I want to talk to you about. Well, don't you think they were interested in that? Don't you think they were going, hey, here's the guy who's going to tell us about one of our inscriptions. In fact, the one we don't even know who it's to. They're hooked. They're drawn in, and now, here he goes. He's going to bring them the truth. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself, listen, gives all men life and breath and everything else. Do you see what Paul just did to the men of Athens? He gave them the truth, and in so doing, he took ultimate power away from Zeus and gave it to God. It wasn't that brilliant how he did that. Wasn't that smooth how he did that? He also, in one sentence, totally dismantled Greco-Roman religion. Why? The Lord of heaven and earth does not live in temples made by hands and is not served by human hands. Well, we got a whole lot of priests doing a whole lot of stuff at all of these temples of Artemis and Aphrodite and Venus and Zeus. And boy, if they're not served by human hands, what are these guys doing? You see what's going on in their mind? He's drawing them in, and now he's laying out the truth of God. And this God, by the way, gives life and breath and everything else. What Paul is doing, he's starting to do here, is take the fear out of the equation in their religion, in their minds of what spiritual life means. He's trying to take out fear. And the reason is because the common element in every world religion, including legalistic Christianity, is fear. That is the one common element, the one red thread that ties us all together. Fear. Fear. Every world religion uses fear as a motivator. Do you know why the Greco-Roman religions had an altar to an unknown God? Because they were scared of leaving somebody out. They were afraid if one of the gods ever did come down and say, you know, you guys have really messed up. You overlooked Frank, the god on the end of the street in Olympus. No, they'd say, here, this was to him, to the unknown God. We weren't sure how to spell his name, so here it is. They were scared to death. That's how their religion, that's how their minds worked. The only time the gods, in their minds, ever got involved in human affairs was when they were angry, when they were mad, when you failed to give them fruit or burn some animal or whatever. When they got angry, now they'd come. So the idea in Greco-Roman religion, and in fact every world religion, is placate the gods. Keep them happy, keep them smiling, do whatever you got to do. Because they're up there with heaven's version of a 30-06 with one powerful scope ready to take anybody out. And yet I want you to see what Paul does to the fear factor. He continues to remove it. From one man, God made every nation of men, that they would inhabit the whole earth, and He determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek Him and perhaps reach out for Him and find Him, though He is not far from each one of us. For in Him we live and move and have our being. And as some of your own poets have said, we are His offspring. Before a person will decide on whether or not they will embrace God, they've got to know He's near. Before a person will embrace God, they have to know He's near. Once again, the ancients believed, as did the Jews in Judaism believed, that God was way off. He was far off. He was way on down the road. And quite frankly, He's not really all that concerned with me. He's out of the picture, out of sight, out of mind. God is not near. And yet Paul comes right back and says, God created people, set the times where they would live and be so that perhaps we would reach out for Him, though He is not far from each one of us. That had to blow them away. God, the God of all this stuff you're talking about, is not far. He's not way up in Olympus and way far away. He's near to us. He just keeps reeling them in. And you know what? We're not so far removed, I don't think, from the men of Athens, are we? I mean, doesn't God sometimes seem far off with the struggles and the trials and the pains and the ups and downs of life? And God, where are you? I mean, David cried that out throughout the Psalms. God, where are you? When are you going to come help? When are you going to show up? When are you going to lend a hand? God's so far away, He's so far off. And Paul says, no. This all-powerful God, the only one, who created everything you see, including you, and set you here, and knows where you are and formed you in the womb, is very near to you. He brings God close to home. And so, what Paul is doing, and what we have to learn to do and be prepared to do, is pique someone's interest. If I can learn to pique someone's interest, they'll always come back for more. This is a general rule. I don't know that this is an axiom that you can etch in marble somewhere, but it's a general rule. If you're interested in something, you'll pay attention. Isn't that amazing? If you're interested in something, you'll listen. You'll come back for more. And so Paul piques their interest. Does he address the issue of idolatry? Yes. But look at how he does it. Look at what he says in verses 29 and 30. Therefore, remember, always ask, what's the therefore? Therefore. Therefore what? Because this kind of a God who created everything, who loves us, who wants us to seek Him, because of that kind of God. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now He commands all people everywhere to repent. Do you see what Paul did? He called them God's offspring. Totally foreign concept to their way of thinking. The only members of that club in Greco-Roman religion was Hercules and a handful of others, where the gods or a god came down and hooked up with a human and the offspring was something supernatural. Hercules is one example. But all of us are this, wait a minute, this God who made everything, the heaven, the earth, who placed me here at this time and wants me to seek Him. I'm His child, His offspring. What did He just do? He just raised the bar of how you think and how you live without ever hammering them one time. If we're God's offspring, then God can't be really worshipped with stone and wood and gold and all the other things they made idols out of. Because I'm animate. That stuff is inanimate. If I'm God's offspring and I'm animate, then God must be something special. Absolutely brilliant. You want to know the punchline? You want to know the bottom line, the theme of this sermon? God made us in His image, so we better stop trying to make Him in ours. That's essentially what he says. But he doesn't just pop them in the face with it. He comes at them indirectly, and now he says, now used to God overlooked such ignorance. He's giving them a way out, or I should say a way in. But now He expects all people everywhere to repent. No matter how direct the approach, always end on Jesus. Always end on Jesus. Here comes the end of his discussion. For God has set a day when He will judge the world with justice by the man He has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising Him from the dead. Quick question. Where is the name Jesus or Messiah or Christ in this text? It does not exist. See what He did? He just piqued their interest again. Oh, wait a minute. God has a man that He's appointed to judge the world with justice and do all this you've been talking about? And the way He proved that He is a Son of God is by raising Him from the dead? Is Paul correct in calling this person, this Jesus, a man? Absolutely. He didn't have to say Son of God. It is apparent. It is inferred, if that takes some of you back. Paul knows that the indirect method must end with planting the seed of Jesus so that God can let that thing sprout. In other words, this man and resurrection from the dead whetted their appetite for more. And here's the conclusion. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." At that, Paul left the council. A few men became followers of Paul and believed, as did a number of others. What a powerful conclusion to what has happened here. What a powerful way to end. Some sneered, some believed. You can expect the same. Some sneering, some believing. Now, I want to always end with something practical, something you can do, something you can take and rework and revamp and come up with your own, just like last week. What are some, I gave you some indirect methods. What are some indirect methods? The indirect, even more so than the direct method, it absolutely is vital for you to be prepared, because you have to be sharp on your toes to steer a spiritual discussion. Randall and I are going to switch places for a second. Randall's a preacher, or Randall's a guy who comes in off the street, and I'm a body shop owner, a new body shop owner. And so Randall comes into my store and says, "Man, Randy, I haven't seen you in a while. You've had this shop up now, what, a year or so?" "Yeah, been about a year, "Well, man, it's really pretty. It looks like you got some business going on. Tell me, Randy, how's it going?" Whew, what a great question to get asked for the indirect method. What a great question to get asked. If you're prepared, here's what you can do. "Well, you know, Randall, that's a great question. I'll tell you what. My building, my business here, how's it going?" Going pretty well. Lord's been good. "My family, man, got a great family, great wife. Boy, things at home, wonderful. Spiritually, I have discovered the most incredible truth, that true Christianity has absolutely no religion." Can you believe that? That guy may be saying to himself or out loud, "Hey, TMI, buddy, too much information." And so you say, "Fine," and you go on. You planted the seed. But he may say, "Wait a minute, Christianity means no religion? Well, what in the world does that mean?" And you're off and running.